Today's daf we're going to learn is Makkot daf Kafet. Today's daf is dedicated to the memory of the fallen soldiers of the IDF and security forces who fell in defense of Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael. To the memory of those whose lives were tragically lost in terrorist attacks. May their memories be blessed. We're especially thinking of our Hadran learners who have lost children, grandchildren, siblings, and close friends in the past year and a half. Continue to pray for the safety of our soldiers, for the safe and speedy return of our hostages, and for refuah shlema for all the injured soldiers. Today's stuff is sponsored by Naomi Cohen in loving memory of her mother, Elisheva Bat Yehuda, Elizabeth Maybaum, on her sixth Yahrzeit. Having fled the Nazi regime as a child, it gave her such joy to see her children and grandchildren living Jewish lives, learning Torah, settling in Eretz Israel, and defending it. He's the Baruch. Okay, with that, we will get started. We're going to start today with the topic that we finished with about the melachot. Actually, I want to mention. Let me go back and actually correct something I said yesterday. I was struggling with the Yom Tov and the Shabbat and the lashes. So the Mishnah mentioned the case of somebody who's plowing one furrow and is liable 8 different lavim. And what we specifically talked about a case of Yom Tov. Why is that? So it is what I thought yesterday, but I just wasn't 100% sure, which is Shabbat, you wouldn't get lashes at all. There is no lashes on Shabbat. And why is that? That goes back to what we learned at the beginning of the chapter. It's a lav shenatan l'asharat mitabetin. There was a machloket about that, but generally we hold that if it was something that you would be commanded to get the death penalty, even if for whatever reason you don't get the death penalty, we don't give you lashes. But that's why in Al Masechet Shabbat, we only discuss either korban chatat, right, if you're shogeg, or punishment of death. Okay, so what's important here to understand is that, and then when we talk about chiluk melachot and Yom Tov and chiluk melachot and Shabbat, for Shabbat it's how many sacrifices would you bring if it was done unwittingly. For Yom Tov, it's how many sets of lashes would you get. Okay, because we're talking about different things, even though we're comparing the idea. So what we ended up with was this idea, because these 8 things, and it didn't say zorea, so it must be because there isn't chiluk melachot on Yom Tov, to which the Gemara said, you sure there's no chiluk melachot on Yom Tov? Didn't we have this case of the gid and asher, where somebody eats gid and asher and cooks it and eats it on Yom Tov, cooks it in milk and eats it on Yom Tov? 5 lavim, we said, right? Let's go through them. We had eating gid and asher, which is forbidden. We had cooking on Yom Tov for something you're not allowed to eat anyway, right? You're only allowed to cook if you can eat it. Number 3, milk and meat, both cooking and then eating. That's 3 and 4. And 5 is for making a fire. So now making a fire, again, for no purpose, and cooking are 2 melachot on Yom Tov, and you would get a separate set of lashes. So that seems to indicate there is chiluk melachot on Yom Tov, right? And that's what we ended with. So now the Gemara says, fine, we'll give you an answer. Meaning, get rid of havara. It's not really havara. It must be something else. The 5th is not havara. We'll change that source. Api kavara. Okay, we're going to actually do this 3 times, okay, till they actually get a good answer. Api kavara va'ayel gidan asher shel nevela. We can say it was the sciatic nerve, the gidan asher, of an animal that had died on its own. It wasn't slaughtered. And that is eating meat from a non-slaughtered animal, and that would be an additional one. The problem with that has to do with a different source, which is on this source that we read about the Gid and Asher, Hatani Rabbi Chia had a braita about it that said, Lokesh shtayim al achilato v'shalosh al bishulo. He categorized them. He said 2 of them have to do with the eating and 3 have to do with the cooking, because you did 2 actions here. And he was just separating. Now, if you say that 2 have to do with eating, then you can't say that the 3rd, instead of making a fire, which would have to do with the cooking, it's actually eating, because we already have 2 eating ones, eating the gid and asher and eating milk and meat. So you can't have 3, because if you had 3, it wouldn't fit in with what Rabbi Chia said about this braita. Okay, and that's what it says. V'im this answer was right. There would be shalosh alichilato chayav. You would have 3 for eating, and that's not what he said. Okay, let's try again. Ela apikavara, take out lighting a fire on Yom Tov. Va'ayel atze ashera. Add in the, now this sort of goes with havara, because you made the fire with trees that came from an Asherah tree. That was a tree that was used for idol worship. As haratemehacha, what's the negative prohibition? V'lo yidbak biyadcha me'umah min hacherem. This is, you can't take anything from the cherem, from the 7 nations when you conquer the land, and it's forbidden to benefit from the avodah zarah, from the land. So that would be a problem. Amarle Rav Acha Rav Rav Ashi. How could you switch it for that? you switched it for that, it would change everything. Because Lokenami Mishum Lo Tavi To'ava Beitecha. There's two problems with the Asay Asherah. You've transgressed two negative prohibitions. One is from the pasuk Lo Yidbach B'Yadcha Mu'mam Acherem. You can't benefit at all from anything you take from them. The truth is, not even if it's not avodah zarah. That's number one. And two, you can't bring a toeva, which is avodah zarah and eitz Asherah, into your house. House doesn't mean necessarily into your actual physical house, but meaning take it and use it. So you would actually get two, which would mean instead of it saying someone who eats gid and asher could get five, you would say it would be six, because this one would be two. So it's eitz asher, and again, it didn't say that. So that doesn't fit. Ella, third and final answer, Ella hacha b'mayaskinan, kigon shebishlu be'atze hekdesh. You cooked it in, you used the firewood that was sanctified to the temple that you're not allowed to use, can't benefit from that. Where do we know you'll get lashes for that? It says asherehen tisrefum be'esh. Okay, the atze asherah of the avodah zarah, of the idol worshippers, you have to burn. The next pasuk says, Lo ta'asun ken la'Hashem Elokechem. And don't do that to your God, meaning anything that belongs to your God shouldn't be burned, meaning you can't use it. Okay? So there you have the possibility, which actually could work, which is instead of havara, making a fire, it's havara be'atze hekdesh. And then we could explain it in a way that won't create a problem to our theory that there is no chiluk melachot on Yom Tov. Okay, that if you do one act or two acts or whatever it is, that you were mechalal Yom Tov, and in that act you were transgressed two different melachot, you wouldn't get separate sets of lashes for each one. Okay, now we're going back to the Mishnah in the case of there's a person who could get 8 sets of lashes for doing one action of plowing one furrow. Okay, and then we gave all these unique situations. It was a Kohen, it was a Nazir, it was right by the cemetery, it was on the Shana Shemitah, it was a kilayim bekerem, and basically, by flipping the soil, did some planting of kilayim, and they were mukdashim, they were sanctified. Okay, we went through all these, and they used the shor and a chamor together, and with that we got to 8. Now, here comes the creativity of the rabbis, and we're going to have 7 different rabbis that each suggest, you could have even gotten to more. You could have created a more creative situation if that wasn't creative enough, where you could even transgress more. Now, the first 6, basically, they're just going to give the suggestion, and it's actually not written in the language of a suggestion, but it's actually matkif. Each of the 6 are like they attack, why didn't you say this? Why didn't you say that? Why didn't you say that? The 7th is going to be actually introduced by Amarle. Somebody says to someone else, and then they end up with a discussion. And only in that case will the discussion lead to the fact that, okay, this one really doesn't belong on the list. Or that we could give an explanation as to why the Tana didn't add this one. Okay, so that's our intro to this section. Matke flower of Hashaya, first one. Okay, there's a siman about all the different possibilities, which are the names of the rabbis who come up. Says, why don't you say that the plowing was done in a field that was right next to the stream, the Nachal, which has all different definitions what exactly Nachal is, stream that streams very strongly. But anyway, the Nachal is where you're supposed to do the Egla Rufa ceremony. So why don't you give an example where it was done right in an area next to where an Egla Rufa ceremony happened, which is when someone dies and they don't know who's responsible, and then they break the back of the neck of an egel, of a calf. Now, there it says, where you did this Egla Rufa ceremony near this stream, you're not allowed to work the land there. So let's say you plowed there, you would transgress this negative prohibition. And then it could have been 9 instead of 8. Matkepla Rav Chananya. So comes Rav Chananya and says, okay, I'll give you another one. Let's say God's name was written on a vessel. And as you were plowing, you knocked into that vessel, broke it, and God's name was erased. And what's the warning? This was the same pasuk we quoted part of it before. Ibadetem shmam, just like Asherehen tisrafum be'esh. Another thing you're supposed to do is wipe out the names of their gods. And then it's actually the next pasuk, but it's right next to it, and it's clear it relates to it, is Lo tasum ken l'Hashem Elokechem. Don't do that to your God. From there, we know you're not allowed to erase the name of God. So that would be another one. Matkifla Rabbi Abahu. Rabbi Abahu says, "V'lichshav nami hakotzetz et bahalto." Let's say while you're um, plowing, you knock off on your hand, maybe the plowshare rubs against your hand, and you knock off a leprous mark you have on your hand or somewhere on your body. Okay, you're not allowed to take off a leprous mark. Hishamer benega hatzarat. Okay, and then Hishamer benega hatzarat. They learn from there, right? Observe the laws of benega hatzarat, and one of them is not to remove. From there, we learn you're not allowed to remove a leprous mark, and it's a lo taseh because hishamer is a lo taseh. Right? We learned that already. The language of hishamer, pen, and all those other words also represent negative prohibitions. Number 4, matkifla Abaye. Abaye says, what about this one? V'lichshav nami hameziach hachoshem me'al heifod v'masir badei aron. Okay, here's an interesting one. Hard to understand the reality of this case exactly, how this would happen. But you're not allowed. Now, remember the case was a Kohen. So now we're going to say it was a Kohen Gadol, not just a Kohen. And the Kohen Gadol wears this choshen, right, which is the breastplate that's attached to the ephod, to the apron. You're not allowed to take the breastplate off the apron. Okay, there's a lotas. We're going to see that right now. And you also can't take out the badim, the poles that were in the aron had tabaot, these rings next to it, the aron HaKodesh, and they had these poles inside. You're not allowed to remove the poles. Okay, that's the pasuk we're going to quote right now. V'lo yasuru b'tabaot. I'll read the beginning of the pasuk. B'tabaot ha'aron yu badim. Okay, that in the tabaot you should have these badim, these poles. Lo yasuru mimenu. They shouldn't be taken out. And the other one is lo yizach ha'choshen. Okay, you can't take the choshen out off. Lo yizach ha'choshen me'al ha'ephod, from the ephod. So basically, let's say while you're plowing, you either somehow, I don't know why the Aron is there, and I don't know why the Kohen Gadol is plowing with his priestly clothing, but if as you were doing it, something got detached somehow and you detached the choshen from the ephod, as you were doing it, or some people say the badim actually use the badim to plow with, okay, and then that's a little weird because you already took them out before, but it would be also so long that you don't put them back in, you're actually transgressing. Okay, so by using them, you're not returning them to their place, or perhaps somehow you knocked it out with the plowshare while you were plowing. Okay, a little bit of a overly creative kind of idea here, suggestion. Okay, next one, 5. Matkifla Rav Ashi, v'lichshav nami hachoresh v'atzei ashera. What if you built the implement that you were using, the plowshare, you built it with wood that came from a tree of Asherah? As we saw before, lo yidbak b'yedcha mu'umam and acherim, you can't use that. Matkifla Ravina, number 6. V'lichshav nami hakotzetz ilanot tovot. What if you, as you're plowing, you knock down fruit trees, which you're not allowed to cut, fruit trees? You're supposed to eat from those trees, and you're not allowed to cut down a fruit tree. Number 7. Amar le Rabbi Zera le Rabbi Mani, b'lichshav nami kigon damal, shvua shelo echrosh b'yom tov. Okay, this is the one I told you we're going to reject ultimately. It's going to take some back and forth. But what if you said, I'm going to take an oath that I won't plow on Yom Tov? And that would be a case that would add an additional set of lashes for going against your oath, right? Not keeping to your oath. So they say, what do you mean? Okay, so this is Rabbi Zera said to Rabbi Mani. Rabbi Mani said, what do you mean? Hatam lo kachal shvua, mushbava omei mehar sinaihu. This is something that's going to lead into Shvuot, okay, which was coming up. So that is a case. Now, we have a principle when it comes to Shvuot, when it comes to oaths. Ein shvuah chala al shvuah. If you have one oath, and then you forbid yourself again, you say, I take an oath I'm not eating today at all. And then you take another oath I'm not eating today. Well, you already took an oath. There's no such thing as an oath on an oath. Okay, if they're exactly the same, it doesn't work. So the case of not plowing on Yom Tov is already forbidden by the Torah. And all of us, it's as if we were at Har Sinai. And it's as if we took an oath at Har Sinai to keep the Torah. As we took an oath, really. So we took an oath to really keep all the Torah. So therefore, we're already, right? It's as if we all took oaths and already forbade these things to ourselves. And therefore, if we take another oath on something that says in the Torah, like any oath you say, I swear I won't eat non-kosher food, but it already says don't eat non-kosher food. So that wouldn't be an oath that has any significance at all. So that explains why it's not there. So Amarle, so he says to him, well, fine, I'll modify what I said. Rabbi Zera says, "Kigon de amar shvua shalochosh bein b'chol bein b'yom tov." If you say, now in this case, an oath could work. It's called an isur kolel. It's when I make an oath that I'm going to forbid something that actually is permitted to me and something that's already forbidden to me. If I do that, then I can actually be liable because then the shvua, as we say, has a place to rest. Makom lachul. It can actually apply to that case of the things that are permitted to me, and therefore it'll also apply to what's not permitted to me. So if I take an oath, I won't plow any day of the week, and also not on Yom Tov, then that will apply even on the Yom Tov part. That's how an Isur Kolo works. Demigo dechala ale shvua b'chol, because it actually works on the weekday part. Chala ale nami b'Yom Tov. Then the rest of the shvua takes place as well. So now they say, well, so now Rabbi Mani has an answer to this too. He says, "Mididite b'she'ela lo katani." Why didn't the Tan of the Mishnah mention this case? Because in action, the Tana of the Mishnah didn't mention actions that could be undone. If I take an oath, I can always go to a rabbi and try to get it undone. Okay, I could say, oh, I made a mistake. I didn't realize, right? Like we learned with nidarim, with vows. So since it can be undone, I can do she'elat shvu'ah. Therefore, it wasn't mentioned in the Mishnah. They were talking about things that are absolute, that can't be changed. Okay, like I can't just undo the prohibition to plow on Yantiv, right? But I can undo a vow. So they say, wait a minute, nothing in this Mishnah can be undone? Vaha hekdesh, hooray, right? There's hekdesh. Hekdesh can be undone. Right? You can redeem things. There's all sorts of ways you could undo hekdesh. So they say, well, maybe it's talking about a bechor, a firstborn animal. A firstborn animal has sanctity no matter what, never is removed. So, and you can, because even if there's a mum, let's say, there's a blemish, and you can't bring it as a sacrifice, right? Which then you'd be able to actually redeem the animal and redeem the sanctity in a regular animal, but in a bechor, you can redeem it, but it always has a certain level of sanctity, and you actually can never work with that animal. You can never plow with it. So that would be forbidden. That's what we're talking about in the Mishnah. So that would be forbidden. So that doesn't pose a problem. Hare Nazir. Okay, Nazir can be undone, right? And Nazir is basically just a vow. So you can undo the vow of Nazirut. Well, but Nazir Shimshon. If somebody takes upon themselves to be a Nazir of Shimshon, that is final. Okay? And they say, wait, Nazir Shimshon can't be the case in the Mishnah. Nazir Shimshon, if you remember, we learned about this in Nidarim, in Nazir, it's a different type of Nazirut. And one of the things about it that's different is Nazir Shimshon, Bari Chume Lemetimu. And Nazir Shimshon could actually come impure to a dead body, become impure from a dead body, which means that by saying it was a Kohen and it went to a Nazir and it went into the cemetery, that wouldn't be a problem if it was a Nazir Shimshon. So you can't answer there was a Nazir Shimshon, in which case you can't say, oh, the Mishnah just didn't mention things that could be undone because Nazir could be undone. So that's not a good answer. But Rabbi Mani comes up with the Gemara. We don't know if they're still having a discussion or not, but the Gemara comes up with this answer. Alahai Tana, Isur Kola late. Now, what I said before about a shvua, but if I take an oath on something that's permitted and forbidden, it will apply because it's an Isur Kola. Well, some people don't buy that an Isur Kola works, and they'll say, either it doesn't work at all, or maybe it works for the Dvarim HaMutarim, but it doesn't work for the Dvarim HaSulim, and that's why we would say it's not listed there, because that kind of shvua wouldn't work according to the opinion of the Tan of our Mishnah. Okay, because for sure plowing wouldn't be forbidden because of that oath, because you're already mushbava omed from Har Sinai. Okay, next. Okay, so the first two sugyot we did were these big lists of options and stuff, but one was trying to understand, is there really not chiluk malacha b'yom tov? What about that source about the Gida Nasheh? And we eventually, after three attempts, the third attempt worked to resolve that. And then we went back to the Mishnah of the Yesh Chovesh Talam Chad, and we had 7 rabbis who suggested perhaps bringing some other case. All of them perhaps could have been, okay, we don't reject them except for the last one. Couldn't be a case of an oath. Okay, now we're moving on to two kind of strange cases where you get lashes. Amar Rabbi Yoshaya, Harmarbia Shor Psulei Mukdashim Lokeshnayim. Okay, if you take a shore that was a disqualified hekdesh, meaning you had an animal that was supposed to be used for hekdesh, and then it got a mum, okay, it got a blemish, became disqualified, you redeemed it as we said before, and now the sanctity is off that animal. But the sanctity of the hekdesh actually still remains, and there's certain things you still can't do with it. So you're not allowed to use that animal for mating, for example. So now, right, one second. That's chulin. 1 second. Right. Sorry. It's asur b'gizav avodah. You can't shear it and you can't work the animal. Now, if you take this animal and you breed it with its type, now crossbreeding is a problem. But if you take the shore, the ox, and you breed it with a cow, which is the same type, okay, which should be fine. However, they're going to say the following. You can actually breed these animals. You can't crossbreed them. Okay, but this isn't crossbreeding. Well, this is a unique thing here, which says that you're actually going to be liable. Okay, first of all, you're going to be lokesh naim. Okay, you're going to get two sets of lashes. So one is for the kilayim element because you're, even though, now what's kilayim? Two different types. Now this is the same type. However, what he says is you're actually breeding it with an animal that's not the same type because this animal itself is made up from two different types. This animal is both chulin and hekdesh, and we're going to view chulin and hekdesh as different types. Like you can't take a chulin animal and breed it with a hekdesh animal. So likewise, since this animal has both hekdesh and chulin in it, it's not really the same type as a para, and you're going to get lashes for that. Okay? So one is, so this, sorry, I was right what I said before. The first set of lashes you're going to get because you actually can't use this animal. So by breeding it, that's actually benefiting from it and using it. So that's number one. And number two is crossbreeding it because it in of itself is two different types, and therefore breeding it even with its own type is going to be a problem. Next thing. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, another kind of similar, and this is even taking this to a bit of a crazier way. Hamanhig b'shor psulei hamukdashim lokeh. You're not allowed to, use an animal, like use two different types of animal to do work together. Right? Lo yachrosh b'shor b'chamor yachdav. We talked about that already yesterday. That was one of the cases of the eight. And that's probably why this is here, the sugya. So if you can't take a shor and a chamor and have them pull a wagon together. So now we're going to say you can't even take this one shor, which is both chulin and hekdesh mixed in, by working that animal at all, you're actually, right, by having it carry something for you or pull a wagon, that in and of itself is you're liable for using two different animals, two different types of animals to pull something. Okay, because they're two different types, you're not allowed to. This animal itself is two different types. So just by that animal itself, you'll be okay. Guf echadu katuv kishnei gufim. Even though it's one body, it's as if it's two because it's got chulin and hekdesh mixed in. Okay, new Mishnah. Now we're finally getting to, okay, we dealt with, if you remember in Sanhedrin, we had two issues with every one of the four types of deaths. One is, how did they do it? And two is, right, we got a graphic description, which today we're going to get, of how the beating of the lashes works. And who gets it? Eluhain ha lokin, ha nisarfin, ha this. So we did the Eluhain, who gets all these. Now we want to know how many how many lashes do you get, and all sorts of details about the implementation of the lashes. And then we'll get to actually what happened there. Like what was how did they do it? Where was the person? What position were they in? Where did they get them? All that. So kama malkinoto, arba'im chaser echad. You get 40 minus 1. If you remember, the Torah says 40. We're going to learn today how we get to 39 and not 40. Shnema bimispal arba'im. If you try to look for a pasuk that says mispar arba'im, you won't find it. Okay, mispar is by the number of 40. Okay, we're going to see later how they get it from the number of 40 to less than 40. But what they say here is minyan shu samuch la'arba'im. Bimispar arba'im, the way they learn it is, the way you read it is, a number that is close to 40. That's how they explain it. So now where does this come from? Well, in the psukim about lashes, it says, Vayayin bina kota kasha, right, when you're hitting the evil person, when they get their lashes, v'pilo shofet v'kau, we're going to get to this later. The shofet puts the person down and hits him, lifanav, in front of him, kedei reshato bamispal, according to what they did, with a number, b'mispal. The next word is arba'im yakenu lo yosif, hit 40 times, not anymore, okay, etc. Now, what they did here is they took away the end of the pasuk and they put together the word b'mispar with arba'im. We've seen that many times where they take away a comma in a pasuk and read it like that. We just did that yesterday at the end of yesterday's daf. Here also, that's the method, but here it's the end of a pasuk. It doesn't matter. Either which way, it's the same idea. Mispar arba'im, they put those two words together and from there they derive it. But interestingly enough, there's another opinion. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Arba'im Shleimotu. Okay, he says, what do you mean? The pasuk says 40. It means 40. You actually get 40. Now, the question they ask is based on they know later in the Mishnah is going to say a third you do it in the front of the body, and two-thirds you do on their back. And now the problem is if you do a third and a third, 39 is divisible by 3, but not 40. So he says if a third, assuming you know the later Mishnah, which is a third are done in the front and two-thirds are done behind on the person's back, where does this extra one, the 40th one, where do you hit the person? Ben ktefav, between the shoulders. Okay, that's the answer. Ein omdimoto. Now we're going to talk about. There's an assumption. There's all these assumptions made in this Mishnah, like you know this. Okay, we'll get to some later as well. That you make an assessment. You don't just give 39 no matter what. You assess, can this person handle 39? And then you establish, okay, you know what, they can only handle 20. So what do you do if they can only handle 20? Well, ein omdimoto ela b'makot ru'uyot lishtalesh. It has to be divisible by 3, as we said, because a third and two-thirds are done in this way. So we're going to basically make it divisible by 3. And then we're going to say instead of 20, you get 18. You always go less. Amdu lekabel arba'im. What if you assess the person can handle 40? Then veloke, and you start giving them lashes. Veloke miktsat, you started doing some of them. Va'amdu, turning out I'm a bet. Amdu she'en yachol lekabel arba'im. And then you say, you know what? This person can't handle 40. As soon as you realize this person can't handle 40, patur. It doesn't matter if they can handle more than what you did, but not 40 or 39. But you stop right there. Why is this? So we're going to talk about this more in the Gemara later, but it would be helpful if you understood this all right now. First of all, notice in the Mishnah, it's only if you already started getting lashes. It sounds like if you hadn't gotten lashes, they would reassess and say, okay, well, how much can this person handle? And let's give them that amount. So the assumption here is that when you did the first assessment and then realized that the person can't handle that, you made a mistake. If you made a mistake, it means that your whole first assessment was canceled. Okay, so that's step one. Step one is, okay, you assess for 40, and now you can only, let's say, do 18. Okay, we don't care. Let's say you did 5 already, okay, or 6. I guess you did it in threes, you did 6. Now what happens? We just stop at 6, even though you could theoretically get to 18. Because why? Well, your first assessment was canceled because it was clear you were wrong. Therefore, it's canceled. Now, you can't continue to do lashes right now because you can't do lashes without an assessment. And you don't have an assessment because your original assessment was canceled. Do a new assessment? You don't need to. Why don't you need to do a new assessment? Because the person already got lashes. Now, in the pasuk about the lashes, it says, this is the next important stage to understand. Means the person was humiliated. Now, the whole idea, and if you listen to Daf Mishalahem this week, really talked about that, the whole idea of lashes is to make you do tshuva, right? To make you repent. What makes you repent? The humiliation. Now, if you already got lashes, then you already were humiliated. So since you were humiliated already, there's no need to do a new assessment. So basically, again, stage one, you made a mistake. So your original assessment is canceled. You can't continue with the lashes because you have no assessment right now. The assessment was canceled. But you don't need to do a new assessment because you've already gotten lashes and you've already fulfilled niklachi chaleinek. That's the first case. The second case is based on the same idea, but it's the reverse. Amdu lekabel 18 umishalaka amru sheyacholu lekabel 40 patur. It happened in the reverse. They said the person can only handle 18. And they started giving them lashes. And then they realized, wow, this person's really strong. We could even do more. Then again, the first assessment is canceled. So you can't continue to give lashes. And you don't need to continue anymore because you've already given, and you've already fulfilled that. So you'd be exempt. But notice, if you didn't get lashes at all yet, let's say in both cases, you messed up your assessment and you didn't get lashes, what will we say? Do a new assessment, right? And you would then get whatever they assess you for the second time. That seems to be implied from the Mishnah because the Mishnah specifically says, and once you already got lashes, then you're exempt from getting any more. So we're going to have a contradiction to this in the Gemara, and we'll have to deal with the contradiction. Okay, moving now to the Gemara, we're going back to the beginning of the Mishnah, which is, what's the opinion of the rabbis? How did they get to 39? My time. Iktiv arba'im b'mispal. Now it did say arba'im b'mispal, right? It did say mispal arba'im, but it wasn't so clear how we got from there to 39. So they say, if you say if the pasuk had said arba'im b'mispal, 40 in number, then we would have said Hava Mina Arba Minyana, 40 in number. Okay, that would be translated literally as 40 in number, and then we would have said 40. But Hasha Dichtiv Mispar Ba'im, the number of 40, that already is the reverse order. And because it's in the reverse order, Minyan Shusochem et Arba'im, we assume it means a number that gets close to 40, but not actually 40. Amar Rav, after Rabbi hears this, he says, he says a great statement, Kama tipshai shari nashe, how stupid people are. Sefer Torah v'lo gavra rabba. People stand up every time they see a Sefer Torah, but they do not get up every time they see a rabbi. Now, which is more important, a Sefer Torah or a rabbi? Well, De'ilu b'Sefer Torah, obviously the rabbi is more important because b'Sefer Torah k'tiv arba'im, v'acha rabbanam batzu chada. Look at that. Basically, he's saying, look at the power of the rabbis. They can erase a whole number from the Torah, and it's okay, right? That means that the rabbis have more power than the Torah, which really is saying a fascinating statement about interpreting the Torah. The Torah is only important as it is interpreted. And the interpreters of the Torah have more power than the Torah. And basically he's saying, now we know you're supposed to stand up for Talmidei Chachamim, but apparently people weren't so careful about it. Even today, not everyone's so careful about this. And he's saying, but everybody stands up and they see a Sefer Torah, people have it all wrong. It's really the rabbis who are the carriers and the interpreters of the Sefer Torah that deserve more respect. And he uses this as his example. Okay. Now back to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda, Omer Ba'im Shlemot. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, my Talmud Rabbi Yehuda. Where does he get this from? Dichtiv. Now, it's an interesting way we're going to prove this because again, based on this assumption, which we haven't yet read the Mishna, but we're going to read it later, that you get a third on the front part of the person's body, a third on the back, and then basically we're going to have a problem if we go with 40. 40 is not divisible by 3, and everything is done in threes. So we're going to say there must be some other, right? There's a case where we're going to see there were lashes given between the shoulders. And because of that, if we go with 39, none of them were given between the shoulders, and therefore it must be the 40th. And that's done separately from, differently from all the others, and that would explain this pasuk. Okay, so first we have to understand what the pasuk is. The pasuk is in Zechariah chapter 13, where they're talking about a Navi Sheker, okay, or Nevi'e Sheker. So now there's this whole discussion about these Nevi'e Sheker, and there it says, they say to this Navi Sheker, this false prophet, Ma Makkot ha'ela bein yadecha, now in the Gemara, what are these wounds you have between your arms or hands, which really means between your arms, which really means between your shoulders. That's what we're going to assume. Because your arms are, right, your shoulders by your arms. Now, what do they say? What does he answer them? Amal, asher hu keti beit mahavai. I was hit in the house of the ones who love me. In other words, going back to this idea, I was hit there because they were trying to get me to repent. They love me, right? This is really showing that the melachot are given out of love. It's out of a way of trying to bring you back into the fold. So, what do you see here, right? What other Makkot are given being tefav, if not this 1/40th one? And that's Rabbi Yehuda's proof for his opinion from the prophets. Rabbanan, what are they going to say to that? That's not talking about lashes from the court. Beit Ma'avai is more like what it sounds like. Hahu betina kocha beit Rabbanu dichtiv. That's like in school. When the kid was younger, this Navi Sheker, he's talking about, in my youth, I wasn't exactly the best guy. I did some bad things, and I would get beaten up in school to whip me into shape. Okay, now, right, we don't really believe in whipping into shape and, literally whipping, but that's what they did in those days, and that's what we're saying. The lashes, they weren't lashes by the court, and it wasn't, right? They just happened to beat me while I was in school because I wasn't the best of students. Okay, so that, which fits because he was a Navi Sheker, he obviously went off the derech. He probably wasn't so great in his youth either, and that's what they say. The pasuk is talking about has nothing to do with lashes at all. Okay, now we get to this part about the Mishnah. Ein umdim ela b'makot haru'uyot laka'in lo lakalo. So if you remember, the whole Mishnah describes if you already started getting lashes, then you're exempt from getting further lashes. But implied from that is if you didn't receive any lashes at all, and again, the second assessment basically, once they didn't even do a second assessment, but once they realized they were wrong about their first assessment, the first assessment is completely canceled. And then, since you got lashes, you don't have to continue. If you never got lashes, then you redo the assessment later. Uriminu, but this contradicts the following source. Amduhu, and you're going to see it's almost identical except for one important word is missing. Amduhu lekabel 40. They decided they assessed the person could get 40. V'chazru v'amdu she'en yachol lekabel 40. And then they do a new assessment. Patur. The person doesn't have to get any lashes. And notice what's missing. If they already got lashes and while they're giving the lashes, they realize it didn't say that. This sounds like you're standing on the street or in the court, they haven't yet started and they reassess. And then you actually don't have to get it all. Now, first of all, forget about it contradicts the Mishnah. Let's just think about what the logic of this is. If we say the person was humiliated, they were humiliated by getting lashes. Here they didn't get lashes at all. How could you say they're exempt and they don't need to get anything? And by the way, let's just read one more line here. Amdu lekabel 18. Also, in the case where they said you could only get 18, and then they said, actually, the person could get more. Patur, you don't even have to get. Now, this is confusing whether it means you don't even get the 18 or you don't have to get more than 18. Okay. But either way, you see the first assessment isn't canceled, right? Because if the first assessment is in place, and yet you don't have to give any, the first assessment stays, it's just you don't, right? So if you understand 18, so then you'll get 18, you won't get 40. You don't have to redo the assessment. And in the first case, they say you can't get any more. Well, you're going to be exempt entirely. Now, what's the assumption here? Well, before we said that getting the lashes is humiliating enough, and that's fine. And then you got some, even though you didn't get all, that's enough. Here they're saying that just by getting a sentence that you're supposed to get X amount of lashes, you're supposed to get a set of lashes, and then, they assess, but just that is enough to humiliate you, even just the sentencing, which makes a lot of sense. And that's enough humiliation that you don't have to do it again. That totally contradicts the Mishnah. So how do we resolve this? Amar Rav Sheshet lo kashya. Had amdu liyome, had amdu limachar uliyoma achar. Let's explain. In the case of our Mishnah, it was that you assessed a person, and in that same day you reassessed and you realized you made a mistake. In that case, what are we going to say? Your first assessment was obviously wrong because the status of a person doesn't really change within the same day. So it's obvious that your first assessment was wrong. And remember, the whole way we explained the first Mishnah was our Mishnah, was it's based on the fact that your first assessment is canceled. Now you have no more assessment to go with to continue giving lashes, and you already fulfilled because you got lashes, so you're done. But in the second one, it's amdu l'machav u'liyom u'chav. You assess the person on Monday, and then you reassess them. Okay, you didn't give lashes yet. And then the next day or 2 days later or 3 days or whatever it is, you reassess them. Now, at that point, it could be that things changed. Person status, they weakened or they got stronger. And then we don't cancel your first assessment because your first assessment was a valid assessment. You didn't make a mistake. It's just that the situation changed. Okay, the fact that the guy's situation changed and is now stronger or weaker has no bearing. You already did an original assessment. The problem is the original assessment doesn't match their situation right now. So your original assessment is in place, but it can't be fulfilled because we have a problem. But we don't need to do a new assessment because your original assessment is in place. So since we also hold, according to this, that you already got humiliated, so therefore we can take your original assessment as your sentencing and all, your sentencing plus the original assessment, and we don't give you lashes anymore. In other words, that covered you. So that's the explanation of how to resolve this contradiction. Okay. Avar avera sheyesh ba shnei lavim. If you did something, we're now back to a Mishnah. If you did a sin that has two negative prohibitions, right? We've learned that we had 8 in our Mishnah before. Amduhu omer echad lokeu patur. Now, what do we assess? Well, you're supposed to get 78 lashes here. So then they do an assessment. How many of the 78 can you handle? And they make an assessment. If they think about both at first, and they make an assessment that you can handle 78, or you can handle 60, or you can handle 40, or whatever it is, okay, it works. But if they imlav, what if they just assessed, okay, how many of the first 39 can you get? And then they gave a number, like 13, that's all the person can handle. Now, how are you going to get for 2 sets then? Very simply. Since they separated the assessments, loket umitrape v'chozer v'loket, we give you 13, and then we wait till you're all better and can handle more, and then we give you the second set. Okay? Now, the problem is, the Gemara says, but it's said in a different source, You can't do an assessment for all 78 at once, okay? You don't do that. You do each one separately, and then I guess, wait till they get better. And so how can you say if you assessed in the beginning and you said you could get 60, then you get the 60 and done. We don't wait for you to be able to get all full 78, right? Because obviously if you get 60, you get 40 and then wait a month or 39 and then wait a month and get another 39. So how do we resolve this contradiction? Amar Rav Sheshet lo kashya. Had amdu ela arba'in b'chada, had amdu ela arba'in b'tarte. It all depends on what number they assess. If they assess you can get 41, which is over 39, however, it's not really. Because if we say 41, it's not divisible by 3. You would only get 39. So if we assessed a number that you could only get 39, even though we assessed we said, okay, altogether you're supposed to get 78, you can only handle 39, then that doesn't fulfill your obligation for the second set because it's only 39. Then we have to wait till you get better, and then we reassess how many can you handle now, and we give you probably the full 39. If we assessed you for 42 or anything obviously above 42, where we said out of 78, how many can you handle? And they said 42 or whatever, then like 54, then you get that and that covers both. So then you can do the assessment for both as long as it's above 39. But again, above 39 really has to be above 42 or 42 and above. Okay, new Mishnah. Ketzah makinoto. Okay, to the end of today's daf, we're going to now do this next Mishnah, which talks about the whole process of the lashes. Ketzah makinoto. Now, I'll already tell you that there's a lot of details here that if they had just written pictures, we would have understood exactly what they mean. There's no pictures here. There are pictures, by the way, in the Koran. There's at least one picture. But again, a picture is just an interpretation. We don't really know for sure that's how it looked. We don't know really. There's a lot of lack of clarity about how to understand this Mishnah. Okay, he puts two of his hands on this beam. It seems to be in front of him, right? On this side and that side, right? Each hand is bound to this thing on either side. Some people think this is actually a tzlav, a cross, right? That it means there's a pole going across that way and the hands are out like a cross. So it's unclear whether it's in front and it's lower down, in front of them. Very unclear. And yes, it is kind of good. There's no pictures. The Chazan Knesset ochez b'begadav. So now the person, the Chazan Knesset, this is the messenger of the court, is holding the person, holds the person's, grabs the person's clothes. Im nikru ve'im niframu. Okay, if they get torn, then they do. Achum galet libo. In other words, the point of grabbing the clothes is actually to tear them because we want to have the whip directly on the person's body. Now, there's a stone behind. This is where the Chazan Knesset stands behind the person getting the lashes. Chazan Knesset Omer Alav, he stands on the stone. Uritzua biyado shel egel. Now we're going to get a definition of what the whip looked like or what it was made of. It was from a calf, from the hide of a calf. Kfula chad l'shnayim u'shnayim la'arba. Already we start to get confused. One is folded into two and two are folded into four. Is it the same one? Is it two different ones? Is it one that we then just cut into? It's like it becomes like four strips. We don't really know. And then there's like two. We then take two ritzuot, two pieces of leather up from a chamor's hide, from a donkey's hide, that like weave in and out. Again, it's unclear exactly how this works. So you have this whip made from different straps. Okay, it's got multiple straps. Safrai actually had an interpretation that it's got like three parts to it, which actually means each time you hit that's why it's divisible by 3. One hit would actually count as 3. Okay, that was his interpretation in Mishna Eretz Israel. Yadat tefach v'rachba tefach. Okay, so the handle of it was a tefach wide, and the whole width of the ritzua was a tefach wide. V'rosham agat al pikreso. Now, how long was it? It would get all the way to the stomach. Now, again, it's unclear what this is. Some people think if you hit them on the back and it kind of flips over to the front, it would reach the stomach. Perhaps something else. So a third would be on the front of the person's body, and 2/3 would be behind. Person wouldn't be standing or sitting; he would be bent. Okay, because first of all, you have to get to the stomach. If he's on the floor, it wouldn't work. Why is he even down at all? I told you we get back to this. Shofet puts the person down. That means they're leaning down. So the person who's hitting, who does the whipping, holds it in one hand and hits with one hand. And hakore, and then the person who's supposed to be reading reads the following thing. Okay, if you look in Rashi, by the way, Rashi is not Rashi. I meant to mention this already on Daf Yutet Amabed. I forgot. But on Yutet Amabed it says Rabbeinu Guf in Rashi, Rabbeinu Gufo Torah v'yatzanish mato b'tahara lo peirish yoter. Okay, Rashi died in the middle of the commentary. He didn't finish it. We've seen this a bunch of times already. It's the Rivan, his student, Rabbi Yehuda ben Rabbi Natan. He says here that it's obvious to them that there's someone who reads the psukim, even though we don't know this, but it's obvious from somewhere that somebody reads psukim, and now you're just getting what psukim they read. So he reads from Dvarim chapter 28, first, then 29. Im lo tishmor la'asaf, yiflash em makotcha ve'et makot, etc. Right, this is where we talked about makot. Okay, so if you don't do the mitzvot, that you will get hit. V'chozer l'tchilat mikra. He reads this twice. Then skips to Dvarim chapter 29, ushmartem et divrei habrit hazot, etc. Right, and you should keep the covenant. It's all right, trying to get you to repent. And then he finishes with the pasuk from Tehillim, right? God will atone your sins. Now, if there's still time and they're still whipping the person, then you go back to the beginning. Unclear whether you go back to the beginning of the whole thing or you just go back to the beginning of V'hu and you just keep saying that pasuk over and over. What if the person dies while you're whipping them by accident, right? You didn't think they were going to die. Patur, you're exempt. This we learned already in Yer Miklat. You don't have to go to Yer Miklat because you were doing a mitzvah. But hosiflo over to achaf ameh. But if you made a mistake and you counted wrong and you gave more than you needed to, then you go to hareze gol al yado. Then you go to the ir miklat for making a mistake. Nitkakel. Last line for today. We already saw v'niklachi chalein echet. They get humiliated. Now, if somebody while they're getting lashes urinates or defecates, that's total humiliation. Nitkakel bein b'rei bein b'mayim. That means two different ways of wetting your letting loose. Patur, you'll be exempt. We stop right there. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Ha'ish b're'i v'Ha'isha b'mayim. For the man, it's humiliating if he defecates, but it's not the most humiliating thing if he urinates. But a woman, even if she urinates, it's already humiliating enough for her. The humiliation for her is much greater, and therefore we stop for her at urinating. We stop for the man only at defecating. Very pleasant way to end the daf. With that, we will finish. So we started with the whole issue of, is there really chiluk melachot on Yom Tov? We thought, is it really not chiluk melachot on Yom Tov, which we then finally proved. Then we gave all these suggestions. Why did they say only 8? They could have come up with more creative examples. And we had 7 suggestions. Then we talked about this shor psulam ukdashim, which is this weird thing which kind of made up of both and the the ramifications of that. Then we went to how many lashes, 40 or 39, what their proofs are, and what about if the assessment was wrong? And then we talked about the contradiction there in the different cases of what would be if you already started getting lashes, didn't start, and when there would be a difference between them. Then we talked about if the assessment for people who have multiple sets of lashes, how that works. And we finished with how exactly are the melachot administered. And with that, we finished for today. Wishing everyone a good and a meaningful day on Yom HaZikaron.